In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. The United States has imposed sanctions on senior officials in the International Criminal Court, including Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda. The ICC in The Hague has been part of the global justice system since 2002, but its concentration on African nations has led to accusations of bias. Bensouda broadened ICC's investigations to include conflicts elsewhere, which angered the United States. Joining me now to talk about this very issue and what this means is James Davis. He's a global sanctions attorney for American Express, and national security and foreign affairs legal analyst Johanna Leblanc. Johanna, we'll start with you. What people may not understand, again, on the international stage, the United States has two really focuses. One for y'all, one for us. And so the United States is not actually a part of this ICC, correct?
Correct.
And that's because the United States, so it's the United States, Russia, and China. Those are the three countries that are not a part. And so, but they want other people held accountable, but they don't want to be included if they get investigated, correct?
Perhaps. So, Roland, what's happening here is that the United States contends that it is not a party to the Rome Statute, which would have given the International Criminal Court jurisdiction over matters regarding war crimes, right? So here we have the United States government who has been accused, the United States a military has been accused of war crimes in Afghanistan and other places. So the ICC has launched an investigation. So the U.S. is saying, no, you can't do that because you don't have jurisdiction over this matter. But, I think in a sense, it is setting some kind of, bad precedent because you have countries like Venezuela and many others that are currently being investigated. Now, what if they too start saying, don't touch me? While those countries are a part of the Rome Statute, they did ratify. However, the point I'm trying to make is that because the United States is a superpower, when the United States behave a certain way, other countries tend to follow suit, right? But I don't think this is good for the United States because if the United States is saying that you don't have jurisdiction over our country, what this means is that I am not going to provide you with evidence that is needed for the investigation to be conducted properly. But regardless of the United States position, the ICC will conduct its investigation and do what it needs to do under the Rome Statute. But on the other hand, for the United States government, the ICC's final conclusion of the investigation will be one-sided, and the United States will not have an opportunity to present a case. Because let's be honest, who will compel the United States to hold over evidence that is needed for the purpose of this investigation? And in fact, the U.S. government has said, not only you don't have jurisdiction over me, but the chief prosecutor is corrupt, and therefore I have slapped her with a sanction, which will have significant implication because it ruins your credibility as a chief justice, or chief prosecutor, rather.
Here, first of all, James, the sanctions we're talking about, that has a negative impact on these individuals. I mean, you talk about freezing of assets. They can't even travel to the United States.
You see, the reality is
John, 1 second. James, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
All right, great. Yeah, so this actually started 2 years ago. John Bolton, while he was serving as the National Security Advisor for Trump administration, had given a speech by the Federalist Society, September 10th, 2018, I believe was the date. In that speech, he specifically stated that any actions taken by the ICC with respect to the United States and this issue would be met with sanctions. And he was actually talking about the judges at the time. The following year, April, I believe, March, actually 2019, Mike Pompeo made the same statement. In that same month, they actually revoked the visa for Ms. Bensouda. So she could not travel to the United States. Now, even with that restriction, she may have gotten an exception to come for a meeting at the United Nations. I'm not really sure about that, but that is possible. So in June of this year, when Donald Trump issued his executive order, basically laying the groundwork for what we now know are the sanctions being named at the SDN list, the Specially Designated Nationals list, which I'll get to in a second. It was always kind of known this could happen. And so it's not a surprise per se, but it is shocking because the steps they have taken are so far from the norm, which is the norm for this administration, to veer from the norm, wildly. Sanctions are generally used for terrorists, drug traffickers, rogue countries. They're not used in this manner in any sense of the word. And so it's a very provocative, and in my view, they used a broadsword, but they could have used a scalpel.
Yeah, but it's what it is very clear, Johanna. It is an intimidation tactic to target judges and the prosecutors. And again, what the United States is saying is that don't you dare even think about even looking at us, investigating anything. You cannot hold us accountable. We don't ascribe to any other authority but our own. But the United States doesn't mind when the ICC holds other leaders accountable for their human rights violations.
I agree. The United States has always supported the ICC when it wanted to investigate other nations. In fact, through the National Security Council, the United States has made recommendations to launch investigations into countries like Libya, for example. So, but I think what's problematic here is that Secretary Mike Pompeo indicated that the sanctions have been slapped as a result of corrupt practices and so forth. And the unfortunate reality is that when it comes to these sanctions, you don't have to be convicted by a court in order for these sanctions to apply. A mere accusation with so-called evidence is sufficient for the United States government to slap individuals or countries with sanctions. But I think you are absolutely correct. I think that countries in Africa, member states and other member states who have signed on to the Rome Statute, now they're asking themselves, is this a body of court that we should really subscribe to? And the reality is that the International Court has issued a number of warrants, a number of rulings. And some have argued that they have no teeth. And what is the real meaning behind the ICC? And also, I think with this particular decision, we have to think about it. This is an election year. We have an election in November. The president wants to protect the troops, right? Because those are some of the folks who will be voting for him and so forth. But the reality is, when the ICC conducts its investigation, they will find something. So we will be better off as a nation to comply, to provide evidence. At least we will have a voice in the matter. Because
James,
at this point, we will not have a voice.
James, again, bottom line is, I think when you look at a number of things, it's no different than the UN Security Council. The United States has automatic veto. So if every other country, if we do something egregious and every other country votes because we, one of several countries with an automatic veto, we can stop anything that we don't like because of that automatic veto. This is an example of the United States saying there's one set of rules for us and there are rules for the rest of y'all.
Yeah, that's right. Sanctions are generally used when negotiations diplomatically have broken down and you want to force another party to the table. I don't really believe, based upon the history of our administration, that they even sat down at the table in the first place. And so to use this method to get the attention of the ICC, again, it's beyond the norm, but it's also unnecessary. In fact, I don't know what Ms. Bensouda's contacts at the U.S. are, but if she has no contacts here in the U.S. family-wise, property, things of that nature, if she banks overseas, it may not even matter because it's really to restrict you from entering the U.S. financial system. If her lifestyle doesn't really touch or have a nexus to the U.S. financial system, she's not impacted by this.
All right. We certainly appreciate it. James Davis, Johanna Leblanc, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
For having me.
Greg, I want to go to you on this here. Okay, the point here is I think people need to understand out there how we in the United States, how boorish we are when it comes to the rest of the world. The United States does not like being held accountable by anybody. When Malcolm X was talking about going to the United Nations over the issue of racism in the 60s, the United States, absolutely not. When you look at how we condemn the Chinese for human rights violations, but we ignore our own police departments. And it was I remember when one of the Chinese presidents came to the United States and met with Bush, and they were bringing up what took place there, and he brought up racism in America. He brought up police brutality in America. And then America was like, well, that's not really the same. Yeah, actually, it is the same. It is the same. When you have these pig laws down in Louisiana, where you have brothers sitting there in prison for life for trying to steal shears, that is the same as somebody being abused and mistreated in a prison in China or some other country.
Absolutely, Roland. I mean, let's just be very clear. As a matter of history, and you're being very charitable, brother, and I understand and I admire that. I don't say we when we talk about the United States government because I don't own that. We have to struggle against that. The we meaning black people and people of goodwill. The idea, the United Nations was formed in 1945. 6 years later, two of our frat brothers, in fact, W.B. Du Bois and Paul Robeson, along with Eslanda Robeson and Shirley Graham Du Bois and many others, William and Louise Patterson, many others, took a petition to the United Nations in New York and Geneva entitled "We Charge Genocide." They said by the Genocide Convention that the United States had not signed by then, the United States is committing acts of genocide against black people. The United States has never wanted to participate in international bodies that it could not control, hence the creation of the UN Security Council. And it has refused to be a signatory to a number of international agreements. Right before September 11, 2001, there was the World Conference Against Racism that Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, two fine examples of loyal Negroes to the United States governments, tried to dissuade the United States from participating in, and black Americans like Conrad Worrell, being one, for example, went to the UN Conference Against Racism anyway. The problem they had was that Israel didn't like what was being discussed in terms of the war against the Palestinians and self-determination. So the International Criminal Court, which has its own problems now, as we heard, I mean, Fatou Bensouda, who is out of the Gambia, the ICC has been accused. Well, let's not even say accused. You look at the record. The only governments that they were able to go after were African governments: Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, al-Bashir out of Sudan. They lost two cases. They lost a case in Laurent Gbagbo in Cote d'Ivoire, and they lost against Kenyatta in Kenya. But the idea is, if this is going to be an international criminal court, it must apply to all nations. Now, when this punk Mickey Pompous, Mike Pompeo, with his simple, always ending his sentences on it, we're not going to go because we're just saying that it's going to be okay. And, listen, Mickey Pomp, you punk, fake consulary. Let's be very clear. All he's doing is backing up what the United States has done, but not only what it has done in the Trump administration, what it's done in the Obama administration, what it did in the George Bush administration. From the beginning of the International Criminal Court in 2002, the United States wanted the veto power because nobody can be held accountable in the United States. Finally, the only way to break this up is if the people of the United States understand that as long as we keep saying we and backing these people, it's not going to change. We've got to change out all these elected officials. We've got to overrun these governments. Otherwise, that court is going to continue to be what it has been so far, which is a tool that can only be used against people who are powerless to stop it.
Erica.
Yeah, I agree. And when I look at one of the members of that particular court that really reframed the narrative and using of the word sanctions, and the gentleman that spoke on the other panel before, he lined out what sanctions are. And this court member so eloquently stated that it is actual U.S. coercion, and so that they are not submitting to U.S. coercion, and that's what it is. That is calling a thing, and particularly when we're talking about the United States and this corrupt regime, and for Mike Pompeo to really kind of have this gravitas about who are the Black people that are going to be sanctioned. It just amazes me with all of his financial blunders throughout his time as Secretary of State. We need not only go back 2 weeks when we look at how he telegraphed a message from with the RNC convention from Jerusalem. Then we trek back and look at he was being investigated. And if I'm correct me, Reese, if I'm not mistaken, that Senator Kamala Harris sent a message to his office in regards to the Inspector General that was fired, given 30 days to vacate that office. So when we think about how he is under investigation because of his financial mishappenings during his time as Secretary of State, using his office, flying back and forth to Kansas, considering a senatorial run, the way his wife has abused her access as well, that we see, a member of the regime saying, do not as I do, but do as I say. And so when we think about corruption, when we think about sanctions, that term would definitely be more appropriate related to the Trump regime and the actions of Secretary Mike Pompeo.
Reese, I just think people need to understand, again, double standards, and the reality is that the United States, let's just be clear, whether you're talking about Republican or Democrat, we love to tell everybody else in the world what they need to do, how they need to behave. We talk about corruption in other countries. Hell, you can't talk about corruption in Nigeria or Kenya or any other country and don't act like you ain't seen corruption in Illinois, in Ohio, in Louisiana, in New Jersey. We can go on and on and on. But again, that's America always. We're morally superior to the rest of the world when we're not.
The white hood is off on what we call democracy, or the semblance of it, or the ideal of it. And it's laid bare for the entire world to see. Once again, I mean, our reputation was in the trash when George W. Bush was president because of the wars that he started. But now under the Trump regime, it's very clear that we're a white nationalist government, an autocracy, fascist, and I could go on and on and on. What concerns me is not just the way that they've clearly targeted to African, Black, however you want to characterize it, criminal justice, international criminal justice purveyors. But we know with the Trump administration that there's always an escalation. There's always they take an inch so that they can take the next mile. And so I'm concerned about this kind of political targeting of political adversaries, because you have people like Tish James in New York that are investigating him. So what's to stop him from escalating using these kinds of tactics against attorneys generals who are suing the Trump administration over their sabotage of the post office and their sabotage of Obamacare and their sabotage of a number of things that are happening. And so that's what really concerns me. In addition to obviously how appalling what they've done is the way that the Trump administration is escalating prior to the election, and God forbid how they will escalate if they get another 4 years of complete fascist control of our country.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, the folks at Ceek.com, Black-owned company founded by Mary Spiel. They've had a couple of great products we want you to check out. This is their virtual reality headset, which, of course, allows for you to watch the content on Ceek.com right through your phone. Check it all out in virtual reality. In addition to that, you can also look at 360-degree video on your phone as well. And so that's what this particular headset is. You just simply take your phone, drop it right into the headset, and that's it. Then, of course, you have their 360-degree 4D headphone, which is right here. Of course, Bluetooth enabled, tremendous bass sound. You hear the sound all all around. Also, gamers usually got a headset used for that as well. And so you can get one or both of these products or subscribe to Ceek.com by going to their website, Ceek.com, CEEK.com, with the promo code. Come on, guys, show it, RMVIP2020, RMVIP2020. And so go to Ceek.com. And so we certainly appreciate Ceek being a partner here at Roland Martin Unfiltered, and of course being the sponsor of our bi-weekly tech segment.